You've probably been in a conversation where one mistranslated word almost caused real damage. Annoying, maybe embarrassing, but forgettable within a day. Now imagine that every single word you translated for the next 2 years determined whether an entire empire lived or fell. That wasn't a hypothetical for one teenage girl in 1519. It was literally her job, and almost nobody outside academic circles knows her actual story. Her name was Malintzin. The Spanish called her Doña Marina. History mostly remembers her by a third name, La Malinche, and that name alone has become one of the most argued over words in Mexican identity. She wasn't a soldier, a general, or a noble with an army behind her. She was an enslaved teenager, likely sold or traded away from her own family as a child, handed to Hernán Cortés in 1519 as part of a gift package that also included gold. Nobody involved in that exchange had any idea they'd just handed the conquistador his single most important asset. Here's what made her valuable, and it's stranger than simple bilingualism. Malintzin spoke Nahuatl, the language of the Aztec Empire, fluently, likely from an elite upbringing. She'd also learned Yucatec Maya during her years enslaved on the Yucatan Peninsula. Cortés, meanwhile, had exactly 0 indigenous languages and one Spanish priest named Gerónimo de Aguilar, who'd been shipwrecked years earlier and had picked up Maya from captivity. So for a while, every single conversation Cortés had with anyone deep in Aztec territory had to run through 2 people in sequence. Cortés spoke Spanish to Aguilar. Aguilar translated it into Maya for Malintzin. Malintzin translated that into Nahuatl for whoever they were negotiating with. And then the entire chain ran backward for the response. One misstep anywhere in that relay could have ended the entire expedition on the spot. It didn't take long for Malintzin to remove the middleman entirely. She learned Spanish directly, and once she did, she stopped being a translation relay and became something closer to Cortés's chief strategist. Multiple historical accounts describe her doing far more than converting words. She negotiated. She read local political tensions the Spanish had no ability to see on their own, since the Aztec Empire ruled through a fragile web of tribute and resentment, not universal loyalty. Malintzin understood exactly which subject peoples hated their Aztec overlords enough to switch sides, and she helped broker the alliance with Tlaxcala, the powerful rival state whose warriors ultimately fought alongside the Spanish and were decisive in the empire's collapse. The single most dramatic moment came in October of 1519 in the city of Cholula. According to multiple historical accounts, an older Colulan woman warned Malintzin of a planned ambush against the Spaniards, expecting her to defect back to her own people. Instead, Malintzin passed the warning straight to Cortés. What followed was a massacre, with Spanish forces killing thousands of Colulans in a preemptive strike. The scholar Cordelia Candelaria, writing in the academic journal Frontiers in 1980, put it plainly: on this occasion and others, Malintzin's presence made the decisive difference between life and death for the entire expedition. One woman's choice about which language to speak and to whom altered the outcome of a war before a single major battle over Tenochtitlan had even been fought. So here's the twist, and it's the reason this story stayed genuinely controversial for 5 centuries. After Mexico won independence from Spain, Malintzin wasn't remembered as the brilliant, resourceful survivor multiple modern historians now recognize her as. She was rebuilt in the public imagination as a traitor, blamed for enabling the destruction of her own people. Her name became the root of the word malinchista, still used today as an insult for anyone accused of betraying their own culture in favor of a foreign one. The historian Federico Navarrete of Mexico's National Autonomous University has spent years pushing back against that flattened version of her story, arguing that it strips her of agency entirely and turns a woman navigating impossible circumstances into a convenient scapegoat instead. The author Sandra Sipis, who wrote an entire academic study tracing Malinche's journey from historical figure to national myth, has described her as functioning almost like Mexico's own version of Eve, a single woman blamed for an entire civilization's fall. Think about what that means for a girl who was never given a real choice in any of this. She was enslaved before she ever met Cortés. She didn't choose to be handed over as property, and she didn't choose which empire would eventually stand and which would collapse. What she did have was one skill nobody else in that room possessed, and she used it as effectively as any general ever used an army. Whether that makes her a traitor, a survivor, or simply the most powerful translator in recorded history depends entirely on which 500 years of retelling you happen to trust. You've probably been in a conversation where one mistranslated word almost caused real damage. Now you know what it looks like when the words are handled perfectly instead, and an empire falls anyway because the person doing the translating understood the room better than anyone who actually held the weapons.